हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर उनकी तस्वीर सीने में मौजूद है जिसने लाकर कलामे इलाही दिया
बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम।
कलामे इलाही दिया वो मोहम्मद।
Radio Ramadan program Reflections with your host Zubair Akram and my guest Sheikh Ridwan Muhammad. In previous few sessions, we have discussed the 105th surah of Quran, Surah Fil. And today, inshallah, we're going to go on to the third ayah of Surah Fil with a bit of a recap from where we started from, and we have now arrived at Surah, ayah 3 of Surah Fil, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
I'm wondering if I could actually play these few ayahs so that we can set the tone again, and inshallah we'll continue with your reflection and commentary on ayah number 3 onwards.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
In the name of Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful.
ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بأصحاب الفيل؟
Have you not considered, O Muhammad, how your Lord dealt with the companions of the elephant?
ألم يجعل كيدهم في تضليل؟
Did he not make their plan into misguidance?
وأرسل عليهم طيرا أبابيل.
And he sent against them birds in flocks,
ترميهم بحجارة من سجيل.
striking them with stones of hard clay,
فجعلهم كعصف مأكول.
and he made them like eaten straw.
अज़ीम, क्या तुमने देखा नहीं कि तुम्हारे रब ने हाथी वालों के साथ क्या किया? क्या उसने उनकी तदबीर को अकारत नहीं कर दिया और उन पर परिंदों के झुंड भेज दिए जो उन पर पक्की हुई मिट्टी के पत्थर फेंक रहे थे, फिर उनका ये हाल कर दिया जैसे जानवरों का खाया हुआ भूस. शेख, द सेकंड आया, क्या तुमने देखा नहीं कि तुम्हारा रब हाथी वालों के साथ कैसे निमटा? I think this is what I heard English today, how he dealt with the people of elephant. Instead of कि क्या किया in Urdu, it's like how did he deal with them? कैसे निमटा, यानी उनका काम तमाम कैसे किया. क्या तुमने देखा नहीं कि हाथी वालों का तुम्हारे रब ने काम तमाम कैसे किया. And then we're going to go on to وَأَرْسَلَ عَلَيْهِمْ طَيْرًا أَبَابِيلَ.
Yeah.
So the I think the conversation was the depth of the meaning of the harf atf, wow, and why the use of and here.
Yeah. So yeah, it was yesterday.
Yeah,
Okay.
that was yesterday.
Yes, that's what we talked yesterday.
Why we used and then we'll continue from وَأَرْسَلَ عَلَيْهِمْ طَيْرًا أَبَابِيلَ.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wa salatu wa salam ala Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. So yesterday we essentially talked about the shift, especially to find out what the specific way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dealt with or did. I mean, that comes up in the first verse, how your Lord did with the companions of the war elephant. So the Arabic has such a general verb. It doesn't say destroy, decimate, incapacitate, tear up, defeat. It says fa'ala, which basically means to do. So it indicates there's an open question of how that happened. So the imagination is allowed to, at that point, imagine everything that's possible in terms of destruction. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then explains it in the second verse that Allah essentially did that through unraveling the plot which was in their mind. So this is the psychological aspect of the defeat, which when it comes, then the military defeat is a question of, it's an academic affair. It's a question of detail then, how that happened in actuality. And so this harf ataf is essentially, what it does is it then gives a secondary layer to how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dealt with the companions of the war elephant. So the dealing has already been done with the psychological defeat. Now he's adding another layer. So it's not an explanation of what God did, it's an explanation of how it happened. What God did already has been described as being the psychological unraveling in the mind of the army of Abraha, and Abraha specifically, of their plot, to the point they knew they were defeated. And now it simply is going to fill up the details, and it's going to fill it up with graphic imagery, which allows a lot of the imagination to fill up what we can't specifically see, or also the details that are missing. So if you say a small amount of words, it puts a lot of onus on you to think and imagine the imagery, and the destruction that takes place, because the less you say, the more it's left to the imagination. The more that's left to the imagination, the more vivid the image. And so this next set of actually 3 verses essentially just are attempting to paint a picture of the degree to which, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unravels a plot of a group of people or an army or his enemies or the enemies of the people of God, how that then is brought to fruit in detail in real life. So وَأَرْسَلَ عَلَيْهِمْ طَيْرًا عَبَابِيل is that God then sent upon them طَيْرًا عَبَابِيل, which is طَيْر is from طيور, and طائر is something that flies in the sky. So as I said, once Abraha and his army realized that there was something else going on here, and that the protection of the Kaaba was a real protection, that weakness and doubt that entered into their mind would have meant that they would have looked everywhere to see where this destruction was going to come from. Muttalib had said, the one that has possession of the house will protect the house. It has a Lord. They were now looking to see what the Lord would do. And so you can imagine looking into the sky, looking to the ground, looking left, looking right, thinking, where is this going to happen? And they know they're Christians, so they know that the biblical stories of Pharaoh and oppressors, what that happened, how that happens, they're appreciating that something will happen. And what happens is it comes from the sky. So this is where it's interesting about the mechanism through which this happens. You could take a literal understanding that God sends airborne birds. By definition, they're airborne. Ababil, Ababil is like a metaphor for something that covers the sky. So the image of Ababil is essentially one of something airborne, which is flying, and the density of that is such that it's almost like a cloud. So this is ominous, obviously. It's like clouds coming, and the clouds are not, of H2O. They're not vapor. They're actually birds, and they're actually ordered, and they are regimented by divine decree. Now, what role do they have in the destruction of the army and Abraha and his whole entourage? That's a different thing. Is it the fact that they come once Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decimated the army through natural means, such as some kind of disease or something? There's all discussion about whether this was done through the birds actually throwing down things, which then caused the destruction of the army, or was it something that they were afflicted by, and essentially the birds came and finished off the job? So, I mean, the traditional understanding is that the ababil of the Tayran, this clouding of the birds, brought with it tarmihim bihijaratin min sijil. They
So
came.
you said Ababil of Tehran.
Yeah. So ababil is like this cloud of birds. So when
Okay.
if I said it's birds, it would just be birds coming, flocking, but this is the thing about the birds is that they're ababil. This is what's unique about this situation. And also Tayran, I also mentioned there's a kind of a morphology play here, which is Tayran is like a unity. It's not tuyur. Tuyur, if I said tuyur, it grammatically or morphologically in sarf indicates lots of birds flocking. Okay, so you've got kind of an array of unconnected birds flocking and parting. But Tayran is almost like you're building like this kind of military cloud, complete envelopment. Ababil just emphasizes that, means it's a kind of it's a darkness that overshadows the army. If you think about it, middle of the desert, middle of the day, it's bright, sun's out, and all of a sudden that darkness comes, and that darkness is ominous because it's the promise of how it will happen. Kayfa fa'ala rabbuka. The kayfa, remember we said, how does it happen? The psychological defeat, and then now the actual steps. And the steps will be that there's a whole army or flocks and sea. I mean, so you can even describe like a sea or a cloud of birds coming. And what do they do? Tarmihim bihijaratin min sijil. And at this point it's interesting in the chapter because it moves from God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, being the central actor in this whole thing. If you think about it from the beginning, O Muhammad, have you not seen how your Lord did to the companions of the elephant? Alam yaj'al kaydahum fi tadlil. Did God not himself unravel the plot of Abraha? وَأَرْسَلَ عَلَيْهِمْ طَيْرًا أَبَابِيلَ. And God sent towards them birds in a cloud-like formation. This is
so
God
just
doing
the
it.
cloud-like formation makes it ominous.
Yes. So my point here is, but who's doing it? It's God up until this point. So God is doing something to the companions of the elephant in the first verse. Second verse, God is unraveling their plot and making it futile and causing a psychological weakness in their minds. God is the one that's sending this cloud of ominous bird-like or actual birds towards the army of Abraha. And then it says, Tarmihim bihijaratin. And these birds will now pelt the army of Abraha, Ashab al-Fil, with hijaratin min sijil. So at this point, it's interesting because it moves from God to the birds. So now the birds are being weaponized, you would say nowadays, instrumentalized. They're being utilized they're partaking in the destruction now. So it's from that God works through means all times. So if God wants to bring anything to fruition or anything to destruction, there's means by which that happens. So if a civilization rises, God wills it to rise, but it happens through means. It goes through military might, it goes through economic development, it goes through technological advancement, it goes through agrarian development and research and innovation. All these are means by which, seafaring and finding gold in another continent or something. There's reasons why nations and civilizations rise and fall. But at the core of it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala moving it. There's a divine purpose in everything. God rises and allows certain civilizations to rise and come to the fore, and then other civilizations to drop. These are just waves in human history. And at the midst of that is leaders and rulers. So we know about Constantine the Great, and we know about Alexander the Great. We know about Churchill, and these are all figures, for good or evil, are at the waves and crest. Napoleon or Khalid bin Walid, for good or bad, they're the people at the crests of these movements in human history. But behind it is this divine plan. At individual level, Napoleon, Khalid bin Walid, you think of Christopher Columbus, every person that was at the forefront of a move, they are in some way historical, but at another level, they're individual. They're going to be taken to task for their decisions and their actions. And even today, everything that's happening today, every individual will be standing before God, farda, as an individual, to answer for what they have done. But they're doing it in this divine play of God allowing history to move, people to rise and to see how they play, how they act, how they behave when they have ascendancy and power. So if you think of the world now, look at entities that have power. God is just watching to see what they do with that power, because they will be doing it and they will be answering for it, because they are responsible for it. Agency, they have the agency, the choice, and the people on the receiving end will also be questioned about why they were on the receiving end as well, and what agency they had and what blame they had or what lack of blame they had. Everything will work out at some point. And so Abraha will have to stand on the day of judgment and answer for his plot. And he will come up with it. This is interesting, isn't it? Because on the day of judgment, Abraha will come and he will say, think of it. He will say, look, I established a church, which is the worship of God. This is how Christianity was given to me. It's the religion of the Prophet or Jesus, Isa alayhi salatu wasalam. Mecca was a center for pilgrimage of idol worshippers. So on the face of it, on paper, I'm doing the right thing. But then Allah's going to ask him your intent. Was it that? Or was it just to create a trade route between the Roman Empire and Sana'a to take control of the trade routes? And that's like now, look at America, look at the presidency, the quote unquote Christian, quote unquote fighting infidels, a new type of crusade. And so he will stand, in front of God with his orange complexion, will have to answer. And what was in your mind when you were doing it? Was it that, or was it something completely different? So this is where it becomes really interesting, because Abraha is not like a pharaonic figure in this. He's not like Nimrod. He's not like this evil entity. He's conflicted in terms of how we see him, but in terms of the divine plan, he's disposable, because there's a bigger platform created here, which is the coming of the Prophet ﷺ. So he is caught up with his ego in a divine plan where he shouldn't be. And he will have to answer for that. It might be an excuse for him saying, oh, normal situations, what I did would be not historical at all. It would just be another army trying to, create another economic benefit for themselves, a strategic benefit. But unfortunately for him, he's caught up in the fact that the Hijaz, Mecca, and also Madinah al-Nawwara is being prepared for the coming of the final Prophet ﷺ. And so he's like collateral to that, but also individually responsible for it as well. So when the birds come, they are coming in this ominous form, and what they do is they tarmihim. This is when God then says, okay, nature has a role. The way that cause and effect works is the way that the world works, and that's how it's going to work now. Tarmihim bihijaratin min sijil. They pelt them with stones which are made of sijil. And so there's a kind of interesting here. You could either, Abu Hanifa, and there's a qira'ah which says yarmihim, that God pelted them with stones of sijil. Sijil is like it's like clay, but it's like kind of hardened clay. So it's not stones. It's not like like you have a proper stone, which is something substantial. Sijil is essentially a mud which is baked by the heat, naturally or otherwise. But you could crush it. If you took it in your finger and you you would actually be able to break it. So there's that sense of humiliation here as well, that the feel, which is this kind of war elephant. It's not even an elephant, to be honest. It's a war elephant. It's used in warfare. It's used to inflict fear. The way that that's countered by God is essentially to decimate them through something insignificant to an elephant, which is a bird. Okay. And the thing that the birds are going to use is something that can be squashed by the human hand, sijil. So there's a sense of haqara. Haqara is like kind of contempt.
Humiliation,
contempt, denigration of the plan of Abraha to try and bring Mecca to its feet, to its knees. And that's not going to happen. So what's starting to come out there is like, this is humiliation now. If you try and humiliate the plot of God, you will be humiliated. And this is the end of it. The end of the chapter is very simple because it's just giving a picture, a pictorial, visual representation of absolute destruction through divine protection, through the use of cause and effect, through the introduction of airborne birds that will then humiliate. And then there's a whole discussion, because the Quran doesn't say, did the actual sijil, these clay, baked clay stones, or even clumps of baked clay, did they cause the death? I mean, would a projectile thrown from a high distance cause the death? Or is it that, there was some kind of other cause and effect here, which is some kind of infection, or there was, I was actually at a mosque quite close to where I'm here. And I was with my son, and there was, it was a crow actually. So I just kept hearing noises in the marble, old mosque. It's one of the oldest mosques in Istanbul. And I kept hearing sounds on the marble, and I would see things dropping all the time. I was thinking, what's that? And when I looked up, there's no trees. So what it was, there was a walnut kept falling down, and then after a weird period, I sat down and I kept looking, and then I realized it was birds taking them up really high and then dropping them down onto the marble. And at some point, the walnut case would break, and then the bird would come down and eat it. So I was looking at the way that they were doing it. If it wouldn't break, they would take it back up, go up, drop it, come down, up, down. So it's very intelligent. It uses laws of physics. It uses this ingenuity to get its end game. And we know that there's also birds that what they do is they take stones and they actually target things. So they will take a stone and they will target a thing that they want to eat, like a skull, and they will throw it onto the skull, and skull will break, and they will use that to get access to what's inside the skull. So we know that birds, make use of stones and projectiles to actually as an instrument. So this is what the Quran also plays on here, because it plays on the fact that they may have thought that this was some kind of that the army was some kind of food source. There's vultures, as you know, in the Hijaz as well. So there's all this imagery of the birds basically feasting. So the idea is of feasting. The idea is that, because it's going to come into the next verse, there's the feast here for the birds, that God has placed upon the earth a banquet for this ominous, cloud of birds. So it's not just God is using them to kill and destroy this army. There's a benefit for the birds as well. So they're coming in and they've got a natural inclination towards feasting. And what happens is the whole army is decimated. Disease grips the army. They start to retreat. And as they retreat, they're cut and they're injured, and there's open wounds. And open wounds in the desert will become infected. Once they become infected in a large army that's moving together, the infection is going to spread. It's said that all that journey, which is going to be about 2 weeks or 3 weeks back to Sana'a, there's basically a extended feast for vultures all the way until Abraha gets to Sana'a. He gets there and his flesh is falling off, and he basically dies of natural causes through the infection of the lacerations on his body. And that feast idea is just summarized in the final verse. So I'm going through, I mean, we took like, I don't know, like all up until now, we've done 2 verses. So I'll do all 3 in one go.
Okay.
As we always do. if you want me to.
Reflections with Sheikh Rizwan, Surah Fil, almost coming to an end, I think probably by another session, inshallah. And then we'll go on to Surah Quraysh, an ad break right now. And we'll be back with a bit of discussion on the psychological warfare. I've got a few questions in mind, how they lost the psychological intent, and then moving on to how it was done.
झूम कर कह रही है इबादे सबा ऐसी खुशबू चमन के गुलों में कहाँ ऐसी खुशबू चमन के गुलों में कहाँ जो नबी के पसीने में मौजूद है हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर उनकी तस्वीर सीने में मौजूद है जिसने लाकर कलामे इलाही दिया जिसने लाकर कलामे इलाही दिया वो मोहम्मद मदीने में मौजूद है हमने माना
बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम
In the name of Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful.
ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بأصحاب الفيل
Have you not considered, O Muhammad, how your Lord dealt with the companions of the elephant?
ألم يجعل كيدهم في تضليل
Did he not make their plan into misguidance?
وأرسل عليهم طيرا أبابيل
And he sent against them birds in flocks,
ترميهم بحجارة من سجيل
striking them with stones of hard clay,
فجعلهم كعصف مأكول
and he made them like eaten straw.
Okay, Bismillah. Just before the break, Sheikh, we were, So the question I had before the break in my head was, I've heard that their psychological state was damaged, and they did not receive this wahi. Is it because of the elephants weren't entering the precinct? Is it because there was this dialogue between Abdul Muttalib and Abraha that broke the intent? What was it?
Yeah, so psychological. I mean, I mentioned it a couple of times. I think it's, remember, psychological is to do with how the mind works and perceives things. So you gather information, you observe, and you make decisions based upon what you gather and you observe. The psychological aspect of this is how that can be changed based upon your personal disposition and your perception of things and how they are. So, you could go into a situation. I mentioned this thing yesterday. Like if Nietzsche, the famous German philosopher, he said that you're essentially like a fire that's burning, and you have a choice on what kind of fuel of thought you use to nourish that fire, to keep the fire going, either good or bad. So that's a psychological decision. It's a mental decision, but essentially it's a psychological trick that you can be confident, and you can say that these good memories that I have are going to fuel how I perceive the world, or you can look at the negative. So you can, there's this sense that you can either look through, imagine going down a road, and there's, on the one side, there's a lovely sea view.
Mm-hmm.
You're in the kind of coastal area, and you have the ability to look towards the left, and there's a lovely coastal view and the sea, and then lovely natural view. On the other side, you've got the kind of rock face.
Mm-hmm.
So you can decide. I mean, essentially what he's saying is you can decide to look right or you look left. And you can decide the view you get in life. And that's a psychological shift in perception that people should actually realize that faith gives, because things like tawakkul, tawheed, all these ideas of reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, understanding the impact of the unity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that God is with you, God is looking over you, God is protecting you. That shifts your sense of yourself as well. And so that's the case in normal life. That's how we should live our lives. And one of the things that, this chapter, I think, in one of the undertones of it is the fact that that's such an important thing to preserve. How your outlook is in life. You can either look, they always talk about the glass and the half full, half empty kind of analogy. It's, in a simple way, that is exactly what's being said. So how it is used here is that God is talking about the fact that God showed humanity, the world, the example of the companions of the war elephant, and unraveled their plot. And the unraveling of the plot was essentially through showing and actually planting within their mind the fact that they would be unsuccessful before they even entered into the battlefield. There wasn't even a battlefield. So it was a situation where it's an open goal. You have no opposition and you don't expect anything but victory. But the seeds of doubt start when they know that they're attacking a place of pilgrimage, which again is a sanctified place. He himself created the Qulais, which is in Sana'a, as a cathedral to vie with Mecca. Okay, so he knows that there's a kind of divine protection towards places. He's a Christian, so he understands that. But then the first point at which he realizes that there's asymmetrical warfare here. Asymmetrical is when one party has an advantage over the other in a vast way. So asymmetrical meaning like the Somalis against the Americans in the Red Sea, for example. Asymmetrical, you have to wage asymmetrical warfare. In other words, you have to use guerrilla tactics, you have to use contrafuge, you have to use different methods. And so the first point at which that happens is when Abdul Muttalib says, give him my camels. I don't care about the house because the house has a Lord that will protect it. So, Abraha is thinking, well, he's got a lot of faith, but the back of the mind is this sense, okay, so he has confidence. Where does it come from? And so at that point, he's the leader, he's leading the army, he's deciding, he could decide to go back. I mean, no one's going to say to him, we came all this way, why we decide to go back? He's in charge. So if he capitulates, the army capitulates. And the second point at which that capitulation takes place is when the elephant, which is at the forefront of the army, and which is the calling card of the army, refuses to obey for no reason apart from the fact that it's being mahbus, it's basically being held ransom by God, and that he knows that. And at the moment he knows that, then that's the cycle. The will to fight disappears. And that's the psychological defeat. And once you destroy a person psychologically, you destroy their confidence. The person's a shell of what they are, and that's what an army becomes. At the moment you lose the confidence, modern history shows you that the moment that you lose confidence, you become fearful. Is that at that point defeat is just, it's a question of how the defeat takes place, not when the defeat takes place, or even how the defeat takes place. It's a question of defeat's inevitable. You have no self-confidence. And so how is it going to work? And that's the same with nations that, Ibn Khaldun talks about this. Nations go into, 3 generational cycles, especially ones that try and take land. They go through 3 generational cycles where the initial people come with this fervor and this intent, and they take the land. And then the next generation builds it and brings it to fruition. The 3rd generation don't know why the 1st generation came, unless they're told. And even then, they're not. And then that energy disappears, and it's an inevitable decline. And it's almost like at the decline is when the dog barks the most. It's at that point where it becomes its most violent. It lashes out. And essentially that's the
And
situation, I believe.
that's Ibn Khaldun.
Yeah, so he has this, one of his main ideas is cyclic, the rise and fall of nations.
Mm-hmm.
So based upon this idea of asabiya, which is tribal affinity and coherence. And so, like, if you think of in the modern age, I don't know, like, I mean, Israel's a perfect example of this. Took land, came with this a kind of almost like pioneering spirit, like the Americans that came to the New World, the people that came to the New World from Europe, pioneering spirit, arrived in the East, moved towards the west of America through the Midwest. They were pioneers, weren't they? They had this fervor, and so when the state of Israel was founded, it had that fervor, that sense of get up and go, that sense of purpose. But essentially, somebody else's land. It's undisputed genetically. The people that came didn't belong to the land, and it's known now they don't. That fervor reached its peak probably 10, 15 years ago. And now you're finding, the people that are there now, I mean, they're not Jewish in terms of religious practice. I mean, one of the centers of deviant sexuality is in the world actually is Tel Aviv. And Orthodox Jewish rabbis I've spoken to have mentioned this and lamented that as well. So that society is in free fall morally, culturally. And I think morally, the way that manifests is the fact that even general sense of humanity, of human life is disappears. So that specific group of people, I mean the Epstein files is a tip in an iceberg of a deviancy amongst that specific group of people, which, I mean, it's anathema to speak about, but it's pretty clear. I don't think people need to think about that too much. Anyway, that is the way that society rises and falls. It's through this sense of destiny. And once the psychological mindset shifts, it's a question of time before that culture destroys itself, which is why I've always said at the core of Muslim power is identity. It's identity with its faith, not political, not identity with a political movement, not identity with a political project, not identity with a military project or an economic project or prosperity. It's based upon identity based upon Tawheed, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. That identity transfers over generations, over cultures, and it actually bypasses Ibn Khaldun's prediction of demise. Because if you keep that as a constant, the culture remains constant, and that passes on from generation to generation over culture, over nations. This is why you have Muslim nations in which that Tawheed psychological makeup is consistent, and it will remain consistent through history. And so you have up and downs in terms of economic power, political power, temporal advancements, but it won't affect the main thrust of why you're here, which is the moral worldview that you should have in war and peace and family and all these things. So that's the thing. I think the psychological is at the core of human.
So you touched upon this concept of tawakkul. So tawakkul guides your confidence. Tawakkul keeps you sane. People who don't have this concept, it seems that they are the most confident just now. The nations who won't even know what tawakkul is, they're practicing tawakkul without knowing what tawakkul is.
No,
and
because
they're more confident.
No, I mean, confidence is for different reasons. Confidence in the divine plan is different from confidence or in results. So one type of confidence.
So confidence is from divine plan.
No, there's confidence in divine plan, which is tawakkul. Okay. What you're talking about is this self-confidence, self-assurance, which is confidence in results, in the S&P 500 increasing 8% every year. Confident. I'm going to invest for my pension this way. I'm confident I can retire on £500,000 so I can survive. Confidence that we can impress our military might on weaker nations. Confidence, in other words, in result. And God's not part of that. So that type of culture, actually, interestingly, that thing I talked about, psychological cycles of Ibn Khaldun, is related to confidence in outcomes. So that confident outcomes will, I'm saying, be cyclic, and that nation which is confident will come to its knees. And that's history. I mean, I don't have to prove that. That's the case. Holy Roman Empire. Read Gibbon's history of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. You'll see his take. Amazing book in literature. His theories are a bit weird, but the point is rise and fall. The rise and fall.
So what
And the
we're
rise and
saying
fall
is
of Muslim
confidence
nations
in
as well.
So confidence in outcomes is a choice, and it's a bad choice.
No, it's just the world works based upon life and death, growth and death. Growth, you have growth, and you have one company rises, another company falls. That's the natural way that the world works. It doesn't lead to growth all the time. It leads to a bubble or of confidence or overstretching, which then comes to an end. So that's just a natural cycle of how things grow and fall. Unless you have you could create systems where like the Rothschilds, for example, they have systems through which the wealth of their family remains in growth. So structurally, they've set up the families so that they will continue to grow beyond generations. Whereas most families, they might have one individual successful, and that after death, inheritance is split between people. One of those people might be successful, other 5 or 4 may not be. And then after 3 or 4 generations, it disappears. And you also have very wealthy families in human history, in European history, actually, that were more richer than the Rothschilds, but then their wealth just disappeared through death, through inheritance, through divorce, through squandering. There was no system in place. So you can have a system in place to extend it. Legally, you can have trusts and all these things. But the point here is that tawakkul is a confidence in the ultimate outcome of things. And this is why the Quran says, فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى الْحَيِّ الَّذِي لَا يَمُوتُ. If you're going to rely and have reliance in the living that never dies. The Ibn Khaldun cyclic idea. You don't want to have confidence in that, because at some point there's going to be a bubble, it's going to burst. This is the big thing, and economic theorists and prediction analysts are talking about when's the next big bubble, which essentially is the American economy hitting the wall and having to face its 33 trillion or whatever debt. At that point, you're going to have the mother of all, as I say, the mother of all recessions. And in fact, they'll have to actually come up with a new word for that type of recession. If you have a shift from the American dollar-based economy of the world to one that's based upon resources, that shift will have to be given another name. It won't be a recession. It won't be something that is already talked about, like the Great Recession. This is not going to be a recession. This is going to be something completely different. And so that will be Hay Mayyit, the living that never dies is God. And that's to do with confidence in the ultimate direction of history, not in what you were saying. Tawakkul is not about confidence in results because of your own skills or your own abilities.
Tawakkul is reliance in faith, reliance in Allah's will.
The ultimate, not as much as that, as much as the ultimate confidence and reliance on the direction of history. So if you abide by moral rules, outcome will be good, and you don't have to worry about the outcome. You just have to follow what's moral. In other words, in an action, if it's moral and you did it morally, you're successful. It's not about.
In my mind, there's a disconnect between, if we don't understand tawakkul with mastata'atu, how do we bridge the two?
They're tied. I mean, they're tied because in the Quran it's tied. Like this idea of, I know what you're asking. Tawakkul seems to be this kind of reliance on God and putting your hands into the sky and making dua without looking at what's happening around you. And the other is mastata'tum, is essentially your ability and your capacity. You're told to do both. اعقل فتوكل. The Prophet famously said, tie your camel and then rely on God. In other words, you'd first of all do the means. So that's a moral thing as well. To tie the means and to make the effort is a moral choice. To not to make the effort and not to put into place the steps to get what you want to is immoral as well.
So defining the outcomes is necessary. Having the confidence in outcomes is necessary. And then having the tawakkul that if we did this, this will be the outcome.
But God-centered. Otherwise, it's all that you've said is similar to what a person didn't believe in God would say. It has to be all centered in a godly outcome, moral outcome. So if you remove morality from it, the world economy is based on interest-based debt. That's immoral. It's destroying the world, destroying families, destroying the planet, destroying individual lives. That's immoral. So you'll get a success, you'll get increase, you'll get reward, but reward what? Worldly reward. You won't get a religious reward.
So self-reliant, not dependent on other resources, a community or a nation is needed.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, if you think of the Prophet ﷺ when he set up the city-state of Madinah Nawara, the first thing he did was establish a mosque, community space, essentially. Second thing, he created an extremely large space of open trade in the city, which was a souk. The Prophet actually went out and himself ﷺ delineated the place where people could trade and sell things without having to pay a tax to essentially was the Jewish tribes of Madinah Nawara, Bani Qurayza, who basically would have a monopoly over places where people could sell their goods. And so the Prophet gave an open space for people to sell. That is reliance, self-reliance. He allowed tribal people to come in and sell what they had, and they would get a good price for it. And the Prophet forbade monopolization in the marketplace. The Prophet forbade people from meeting even a caravan before it came to city to short sell as well. So this is self-reliance. This is creating a vibrant economy. And then the Prophet ﷺ created the Pact of Madinah Nawara, which was essentially to set down the rules through which people would interact with each other and protect the safety of the city, so that people could know that when they came to sell and buy, they would come and sell and buy, and they would go without having any fear of what they had made in profit being stolen from them. And so all that is what? The reliance. That's like, people always forget the Prophet ﷺ, first and foremost, was a prophet, guided by God, who put in place the mechanisms through which his city would be successful, and people would come to it, and they would say, Madinatul Munawwara, the enlightened city. City meaning, city is the place where you have indebtedness to the system, which is created to create success and prosperity. And Munawwara is the radiant one. So when the Prophet established the city, that's why, in the last years of the Prophet's blessed life, when the tribal leaders came, they saw what was happening in Madinah Nawara. They all wanted to be part of it. They all wanted to partake in the teaching that he brought, that brought this prosperity. And when they saw the prosperity, they also found the faith also enticing as well.
So all of this is resort kind of going for material means, adopting all the means available, all the tools available at the time. So building of a mosque, an economic hub, rules around that, security.
And also akhawa as well, which is brotherhood, social network, the social, you would call the social net of poverty.
Immigration policy, who could come, who could not come?
No, but there's no immigration policy. Policy was open. The only thing that was there was a safety net for people that came, in which they were, akhawa was famous because the people who came from outside were given a named individual that would take care of their welfare. So so you've got, this is all like master stroke. Each of those, if one person in history did it, they would be studied. Like if all the Prophet did in his life was move from Mecca and Medina and set up a mosque, set up a souk, a marketplace, Okay, countering the monopolization of the marketplace by the Jewish tribes in Medina al-Nawara. If that's all he did, and he wasn't a prophet, he didn't get revelation, and it was historically written down that this person came and he set up an alternative economic space, people would lose their minds. People would people would quote him and say this was a visionary. And this is the problem doing this before breakfast. This is like this is one of a million things that he did just without knowing he's doing, without creating any sense that I've done this amazing thing. This is why he's Muhammad, and Mahmud is the elephant. No one knows. We know Mahmud the elephant because it was the head of an army that got decimated. But that issue of creating the means and the infrastructure is something the Prophet created. And I was teaching Sidi Ali bin Maliki, rahimahullah, one of my early teachers from Makkah al-Mukarramah, his book, Muhammad the Perfect Man, in English. And there's a chapter in it in which he talks about the steps the Prophet took to create the municipal structure of the city. Things like the length of the streets, the width of the streets, the irrigation system, the light that is allowed to come to the neighbor, and the building regulations and the regulations related to, when you have rainfall, you have the gutter. So where the gutter should turn into, the Prophet, it dictated all this. So there's kind of street planning, this was urban planning, there was planning about the marketplace and the tasks of the marketplace and the person that would go in and check the weights and measures. This is just one small thing the Prophet did to create prosperity. And so once you have that prosperity, people are confident enough to then, get on with the big thing, which is to worship God and to spread the message of God.
SubhanAllah. Sheikh, we have final 8 to 9 minutes of this session, approaching iftar. To have confidence and to build confidence is a requirement. I'm going somewhere with this, with the name of Allah, Mutakabbir. I want to end with Ya Mutakabbir. But before I ask you that, is this a requirement? To have confidence, if you don't have, build one. If you do have, make sure you have the means to have the vitality of confidence.
So, I mean, the thing about confidence is we have think about psychology, self-confidence. The idea of self-confidence is essentially placing reliance upon your own capacity, your physical capacity, your intellectual capacity, your skill set. So self-confidence is to feel that you have the ability to do a specific thing based upon the skill set that you have, either through experience or through just belief that you are able to do it if you're just starting off. Self-confidence is and can come very close to being a spiritual disease unless it's grounded in this idea of tawakkul, which is, we talked about the reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So self-reliance is a virtue, is something that, gives a person self-belief. It gives them the ability to, essentially self-love. They have this sense that they are important, which is important in spirituality as well, that you have care for yourself. That you care for yourself, that you care, like at a very basic level, that you care that your akhirah is going to be something of benefit to you. So this is something that we know, like you have to have self-love, self-care, so that at even the physical level of the body that's God given is an amana that you need to take care of, is related to, tawakkul as well, because it ties in with that self-confidence. But the thing about this idea of confidence is that unless it's grounded in the confidence in a higher being, it becomes self-fulfilling, and it becomes self-consuming. It becomes what is called kibr. Kibr is this haughtiness, this pride, this arrogance that you have. You can either have it just within yourself, which is kibr. Internally you just feel that you're really bee's knees, as they say, or it can be takabbur, which is then you've impose it on other people. So your self-confidence exudes to the point that you now make it a means by which you batter and you overstretch yourself to kind of show your strength to other people. And that's called takabbur, mutakabbir. And a mutakabbir is a person that essentially at every opportunity, tries to show their superiority over other people, and this air of accomplishment. So kabir in Arabic is to be high, to be haughty. Mutakabbir is the one that feels that they're always right and they're always, in the ascendancy. They're always successful. They're always the best at something. And that name, as you know, Al-Mutakabbir is one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in reality, if your self-confidence gets to the point, or your confidence gets to the point where it becomes self-confidence that then morphs into takabbur, then you're vying with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-Kabir, the great. Al-Muta'al, the lofty. Al-Mutakabbir, the one that has the receipts to show that he can be audacious. So audacity is also a kind of translation that you can give for mutakabbir. And so a person in that situation has to, what they say, check before they wreck. They have to realize that anything they have of power, authority is given and essentially loaned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it also always has to come together at the same time as having intense humility internally. So al-mutakabbir is quality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there are situations where a believer is told to be mutakabbir. So this is the thing. If you take the quality and you associate with its origin, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're just a means by which that audacity and that self-confidence is used for a purpose, which is in conflict, in a situation where it's required. And this is, again, going back to that long discussion we had just a minute ago about in preparation and taking the means and insisting that the way to do something, the cause and effect, is put into place. So the person in a battlefield has to be mutakabbir, has to have this self-confidence, has to have this sense that they're divinely almost invincible, which is why, people like Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid radiallahu anhu, he exuded that. And I mentioned this, I think, in this set of lectures, that he was called the Sayf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the sword of God. And he had takabbur in the battlefield because it came from the fact the Prophet said, فَأَخَذَ الرَّايَةُ سَيْفًا مِنْ سُيُوفِ اللَّهِ, that the banner of the battle of Mu'tah was then taken after the defeat and martyrdom of three of the prominent Muslims at the time. It was taken by Khalid bin Walid, and the Prophet said, at that point, the banner of the army was taken by a sword, of the swords of God. It said on his deathbed, when he was being, going towards the end of his life, last breath, people looked at his body, and there was no part that they could see of 5 inches except that there was a wound, a cut, something that had afflicted him in the battle, but he was healed of it. And it's at that point, they asked him, where did you get this confidence from? He said, it's from the fact that I was called a sword from the swords of God. And so that's something that, you balance. It's not the quality, it's who you ascribe the quality to. And that's why tawakkul and tawheed are so important. I said the identity of a Muslim as a nation, as an individual, stretches across human history, and it will not rise and fall, because that identity will remain whether you are in the ascendancy at one point or not in another. In the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're honored. This is why Imam Shadili rahimahullah, he said that the faith of a basic Muslim, weak Muslim, of saying La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, if it was shown to the whole of the cosmos, all of creation, all the wealth and everything you see in the world and beyond that, he said if it was compared to the light of a simple believer, a simple poor believer, he said it would efface and destroy it. It would decimate it. And so our victory is on that basis. I mean, nations rise and fall, people die and they live. But La ilaha illallah is something that you cannot weigh.
I think we will end at this note, inshallah. Back tomorrow with another session of reflections. Up until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर उनकी तस्वीर सीने में मौजूद है जिसने लाकर कलामे इलाही दिया जिसने लाकर कलामे इलाही दिया वो मोहम्मद मदीने में मौजूद है छोड़ना तेरा तैबा गवारा नहीं छोड़ना तेरा तैबा गवारा नहीं सारी आलम में ऐसा नजारा नहीं ऐसा मंजर जमाने में देखा नहीं ऐसा मंजर जमाने में देखा नहीं जैसा मंजर मदीने में मौजूद है हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर उनकी तस्वीर सीने में मौजूद है जिसने लाकर कलामे इलाही दिया जिसने लाकर कलामे इलाही दिया वो मोहम्मद मदीने में मौजूद है हमने आँखों से देखा